Time and the Gods by Lord Dunsany. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Part 2. The Journey of the King. 1. One day the king turned to the women that danced and said to them, "Dance no more." And those that bore the wine and jeweled cups he sent away. The palace of King Ebelon was emptied of sound of song, and there rose the voices of heralds crying in the streets to find the prophets of the land. Then went the dancers, the cupbearer, and the singers down into the hard streets among the houses, pattering leaves, silvern fountain, and summer lightning, the dancers whose feet the gods had not devised for stony ways, which had only danced for princes. And with them went the singer, Soul of the South, and the sweet singer, Dream of the Sea, whose voices the gods had attuned to the ears of kings, and old Istan, the cupbearer, left his life's work in the palace to tread the common ways, he that had stood at the elbows of 3 kings of Zarkandhu, and had watched his ancient vintage feeding their valor and mirth as the waters of Tundaris feed the green plains to the south. Ever he had stood grave among their jests, but his heart warmed itself solely by the fire of the mirth of kings. He too, with the singers and dancers, went out into the dark. And throughout the land the heralds sought out the prophets thereof. Then one evening, as King Ebelon sat alone with his palace, there were brought before him all who had repute for wisdom, and who wrote the histories of the times to be. Then the king spake, saying, "The king goeth upon a journey with many horses, yet riding upon none, when the pomp of travelling shall be heard in the streets, and the sound of the lute and the drum, and the name of the king. And I would know what princes and what people shall greet me on the other shore in the land to which I travel." Then fell a hush upon the prophets, for they murmured, "All knowledge is with the king." Then said the king, "Thou first, Saman, high prophet of the temple of gold in Azanorn, answer, or thou shalt write no more the history of the times to be, but shalt toil with thy hand to make record of the little happenings of the days that were, as do the common men." Then said Saman, "All knowledge is with the king." And when the pomp of travelling shall be heard in the streets, and the slow horses whereon the king rideth not go behind lute and drum, then, as the king well knoweth, thou shalt go down to the great white house of kings, and, entering the portals where none are worthy to follow, shalt make obeisance alone to all the elder kings of Zarkandhu, whose bones are seated upon golden thrones, grasping their scepters still. Therein thou shalt go with robes and scepter through the marble porch, but thou shalt leave behind thee thy gleaming crown that others may wear it, and as the times go by, come in to swell the number of the 30 kings that sit in the great white house on golden thrones. There is one doorway in the great white house, and it stands wide with marble portals yawning for kings. But when it shall receive thee, and thine obeisance hath been made because of thine obligation to the 30 kings, thou shalt find at the back of the house an unknown door through which the soul of a king may just pass, and leaving thy bones upon a golden throne, thou shalt go unseen out of the great white house to tread the velvet spaces that lie among the worlds. Then, O king, it were well to travel fast, and not to tarry about the houses of men, as do the souls of some who still bewail the sudden murder that sent them upon the journey before their time, and who, being yet loth to go, linger in dark chambers all the night. These, setting forth to travel in the dawn, and traveling all the day, see earth behind them gleaming when evening falls, and again are loth to leave its pleasant haunts, and come back again through dark woods, and up into some old loved chamber, and ever tarry between home and flight, and find no rest. Thou wilt set forth at once, because the journey is far, and lasts for many hours. But the hours on the velvet spaces are the hours of the gods, and we may not say what time such an hour may be, if reckoned in mortal years. At last thou shalt come to a grey place filled with mist, with grey shapes standing before it, which are altars, and on the altars rise small red flames from dying fires that scarce illumine the mist. And in the mist it is dark and cold, because the fires are low. These are the altars of the people's faiths, and the flames are the worship of men, and through the mist the gods of old go groping in the dark and in the cold. There thou shalt hear a voice cry feebly, Inyani, Inyani, Lord of the thunder, where art thou? For I cannot see. And a voice shall answer faintly in the cold, O Maker of many worlds, I am here. And in that place the gods of old are nearly deaf, for the prayers of men grow few. They are nigh blind, because the fires burn low upon the altars of men's faiths, and they are very cold. And all about the place of mist there lies a moaning sea, which is called the Sea of Souls. And behind the place of mist are the dim shapes of mountains, and on the peak of one there glows a silvern light that shines in the moaning sea. And ever, as the flames on the altars die before the gods of old, the light on the mountain increases, and the light shines over the mist and never through it, as the gods of old grow blind. It is said that the light on the mountain shall one day become a new god, who is not of the gods of old. There, O king, thou shalt enter the Sea of Souls by the shore, where the altars stand which are covered in mist. In that sea are the souls of all that ever lived on the worlds and all that ever shall live, all freed from earth and flesh. And all the souls in that sea are aware of one another, but more than with hearing or sight, or by taste or touch or smell. And they all speak to each other, yet not with lips, with voices which need no sound. And over the sea lies music as winds over an ocean on earth, and there unfettered by language, great thoughts set outward through the souls, as on earth the currents go. Once did I dream that in a mist-built ship I sailed upon that sea, and heard the music that is not of instruments, and voices not from lips, and woke and found that I was upon the earth, and that the gods had lied to me in the night. Into this sea, from fields of battle and cities, come down the rivers of lives, and ever the gods have taken onyx cups, and far and wide into the worlds again have flung the souls out of the sea, that each soul may find a prison in the body of a man, with 5 small windows closely barred, and each one shackled with forgetfulness. But all the while the light on the mountain grows, and none may say what the work the god that shall be born of the silvern light shall work on the Sea of Souls, when the gods of old are dead, and the sea is living still. And answer made the king, Thou that art a prophet of the gods of old, go back and see that those red flames burn more brightly on the altars in the mist. For the gods of old are easy and pleasant gods, and thou canst not say what toil shall vex our souls, when the god of the light on the mountain shall stride along the shore where bleach the huge bones of the gods of old. And Saman answered, All knowledge is with the king. Then the king called to Ynath, bidding him speak concerning the journey of the king. Ynath was the prophet that sat at the eastern gate of the temple of Gorendu. There Ynath prayed his prayers to all the passers, by lest ever the gods should go abroad, and one should pass him dressed in mortal guise. And men are pleased as they walk by that eastern gate, that Ynath should pray for them, for fear that they may be gods. So men bring gifts to Ynath in the eastern gate. And Ynath said, All knowledge is with the king. When a strange ship comes to anchor in the air outside thy chamber window, thou shalt leave thy well-kept garden, and it shall become a prey to the nights and days, and be covered again with grass. But going aboard, thou shalt set sail over the sea of time, and well shall the ship steer through the many worlds, and still sail on. If other ships shall pass thee on the way, and hail thee, saying, From what port? Thou shalt answer them, From earth. And if they ask thee, Whither bound? Then thou shalt answer, The end. Or thou shalt hail them, saying, From what port? And they shall answer, From the end, called also the beginning, and bound to earth. And thou shalt sail away till like an old sorrow dimly felt by happy men, the worlds shall gleam in the distance like one star. And as the star pales, thou shalt come to the shore of space, where aeons, rolling shorewards from time's sea, shall lash up centuries to foam away in years. There lies the center garden of the gods, facing full seawards. All around lie songs that on earth were never sung, fair thoughts not heard among the worlds, dream pictures never seen that drifted over time without a home, till at last the aeons swept them onto the shore of space, and in the center garden of the gods bloomed many fancies. Therein once some souls were playing where the gods walked up and down and to and fro, and a dream came in more beauteous than the rest on the crest of a wave of time, and one soul going downward to the shore clutched at the dream and caught it. Then over the dreams and stories and old songs that lay on the shore of space, the hours came sweeping back, and the centuries caught that soul and swirled him with his dream far out to the sea of time, and the aeons swept him earthwards and cast him into a palace with all the might of the sea, and left him there with his dream. The child grew to a king and still clutched at his dream till the people wondered and laughed. Then, O king, thou didst cast thy dream back into the sea, and time drowned it, and men laughed no more, but thou didst forget that a certain sea beat on a certain distant shore, and that there was a garden, and therein souls. But at the end of the journey that thou shalt take, when thou comest to the shore of space again, thou shalt go up the beach, and coming to a garden gate that stands in a garden wall, shalt remember these things again. For it stands where the hours assail not above the beating of time, far up the shore, and nothing altereth there. So thou shalt go through the garden gate, and hear again the whispering of the souls when they talk low, where sing the voices of the gods. There with kindred souls thou shalt speak as thou didst of yore, and tell them what befell thee beyond the tides of time, and how they took thee and made of thee a king, so that thy soul found no rest. There in the center garden thou shalt sit at ease, and watch the gods all rainbow-clad go up and down and to and fro on the paths of dreams and songs, and shalt not venture down to the cheerless sea. For that which a man loves most is not on this side of time, and all which drifts on its aeons is a lure. All knowledge is with the king. Then said the king, Aye, there was a dream once, but time hath swept it away. 3. Then spake Monith, prophet of the temple of Azure that stands on the snow peak of Amun, and said, All knowledge is with the king. Once thou didst set out upon a one-day's journey, riding thy horse, and before thee had gone a beggar down the road, and his name was Yeb. Him thou didst overtake, and when he heeded not thy coming, thou didst ride over him. Upon the journey that thou shalt one day take, riding upon no horse, this beggar has set out before thee, and is laboring up the crystal steps towards the moon, as a man goeth up the steps of a high tower in the dark. On the moon's edge, beneath the shadow of Mount Angises, he shall rest a while, and then shall climb the crystal steps again. Then a great journey lies before him before he may rest again, till he come to that star that is called the left eye of Gundo. Then a journey of many crystal steps lieth before him again, with naught to guide him but the light of Omrazu. On the edge of Omrazu shall Yeb tarry long, for the most dreadful part of his journey lieth before him. Up the crystal steps that lie beyond Omrazu he must go, and any that follow, though the howling of all the meteors that ride the sky. For in that part of the crystal space go many meteors up and down, all squealing in the dark, which greatly perplex all travelers. And if he may see, though the gleaming of the meteors, and in spite of their uproar come safely through, he shall come to the star Omrund at the edge of the track of stars. And from star to star along the track of stars, the soul of a man may travel with more ease. And there, the journey lies no more straightforward, but curves to the right. Then said King Ebelon, Of this beggar whom my horse smote down, thou hast spoken much, but I sought to know by what road a king should go when he taketh his last royal journey, and what princes and what people should meet him upon another shore. Then answered Monith, All knowledge is with the king. It hath been doomed by the gods, who speak not in jest, that thou shalt follow the soul that thou didst send alone upon its journey, that that soul go not unattended up the crystal steps. Moreover, as this beggar went upon his lonely journey, he dared to curse the king, and his curses lie like a red mist along the valleys and hollows wherever he uttered them. By these red mists, O king, thou shalt track him as a man follows a river by night, until thou shalt fare at last to the land wherein he hath blessed thee, repenting of anger at last, and thou shalt see his blessing lie over the land like a blaze of golden sunshine, illumining fields and gardens." Then said the king, "The gods have spoken hard above the snowy peak of this mountain Amun." And Monith said, "How a man may come to the shore of space beyond the tides of time I know not, but it is doomed that thou shalt certainly first follow the beggar past the moon, Omrund and Omrazu, till thou comest to the track of stars, and up the track of stars coming towards the right along the edge of it, till thou comest to Ingazi. There the soul of the beggar Yeb sat long, then, breathing deep, set off on his great journey earthward adown the crystal steps, straight through the spaces where no stars are found to rest at, following the dull gleam of earth and her fields, till he come at last where journeys end and start." Then said King Eberlon, "If this hard tale be true, how shall I find the beggar that I must follow when I come again to the earth?" And the prophet answered, "Thou shalt know him by his name, and find him in this place, for that beggar shall be called King Eberlon, and he shall be sitting upon the throne of the kings of Zarkandhu." And the king answered, "If one sit upon this throne whom men call King Eberlon, who then shall I be?" And the prophet answered, "Thou shalt be a beggar, and thy name shall be Yeb, and thou shalt ever tread the road before the palace, waiting for alms from the king whom men shall call Eberlon." Then said the king, "Hard gods indeed are those that tramp the snows of Amun about the temple of Azure. For if I sinned against this beggar called Yeb, they too have sinned against him when they doomed him to travel on this weary journey, though he hath not offended." And Monith said, "He too hath offended, for he was angry as thy horse struck him, and the gods smite anger, and his anger and his curses doom him to journey without rest, as also they doomed thee." Then said the king, "Thou that sittest upon Amun in the temple of Azure, dreaming thy dreams and making prophecies, foresee the ending of this weary quest, and tell me where it shall be." And Monith answered, "As a man looks across great lakes, I have gazed into the days to be, and as the great flies come upon 4 wings of gauze to skim over blue waters, so have my dreams come sailing 2 by 2 out of the days to be. And I dreamed that King Eberlon, whose soul was not thy soul, stood in his palace in a time far hence, and beggars thronged the street outside, and among them was Yeb, a beggar having thy soul. And it was on the morning of a festival, and the king came robed in white with all his prophets and his seers and magicians, all down the marble steps to bless the land and all that stood therein as far as the purple hills, because it was the morning of festival. And as the king raised up his hand over the beggars' heads to bless the fields and rivers and all that stood therein, I dreamed, but the quest was ended. All knowledge is with the king." 4. Evening darkened, and above the palace domes gleamed out the stars whereon haply others missed the secret too. And outside the palace in the dark, they that had borne the wine in jeweled cups mocked in low voices at the king and at the wisdom of his prophets. Then spake Yanar, called the prophet of the crystal peak, for there rises Amenath above all that land, a mountain whose peak is crystal, and Yanar beneath its summit hath his temple, and when day shines no longer on the world, Amenath takes the sunlight and gleams afar as a beacon in a bleak land lit at night. And at the hour when all faces are turned on Amenath, Yanar comes forth beneath the crystal peak to weave strange spells and to make signs that people say are surely for the gods. Therefore, it is said in all those lands that Yanar speaks at evening to the gods when all the world is still. And Yanar said, "All knowledge is with the king, and without doubt it hath come to the king's ears how certain speech is held at evening on the peak of Amenath. They that speak to me at evening on the peak are they that live in a city through whose streets death walketh not, And I have heard it from their elders that the king shall take no journey. Only from thee the hills shall slip away, the dark woods, the sky, and all the gleaming worlds that fill the night. And the green fields shall go on untrodden by thy feet, and the blue sky ungazed at by thine eyes. And still the rivers shall all run seaward, but making no music in thine ears. And all the old laments shall still be spoken, troubling thee not. And to the earth shall fall the tears of the children of earth, and never grieving thee. Pestilence, heat and cold, ignorance, famine and anger, these things shall grip their claws upon all men as heretofore in fields and roads and cities, but shall not hold thee. But from thy soul, sitting in the old worn track of the worlds when all is gone away, shall fall off the shackles of circumstance, and thou shalt dream thy dreams alone. And thou shalt find that dreams are real, where there is naught as far as the rim, but only thy dreams and thee. With them thou shalt build palaces and cities resting upon nothing and having no place in time, not to be assailed by the hours or harmed by ivy or rust, not to be taken by conquerors, but destroyed by thy fancy if thou dost wish it so, or by thy fancy rebuilded. And naught shall ever disturb these dreams of thine, which here are troubled and lost by all the happenings of earth, as the dreams of one who sleeps in a tumultuous city. For these, thy dreams, shall sweep outward like a strong river, over a great waste plain, wherein are neither rocks nor hills to turn it. Only in that place there shall be no boundaries nor sea, neither hindrance nor end. And it were well for thee that thou shouldest take few regrets into thy waste dominions from the world wherein thou livest, for such regrets, or any memory of deeds ill done, must sit beside thy soul forever in that waste, singing one song always of forlorn remorse. And they too shall be only dreams, but very real. There naught shall hinder thee among thy dreams, for even the gods may harass thee no more when flesh and earth and events with which they bound thee shall have slipped away. Then said the king, I like not this grey doom, for dreams are empty. I would see action roaring through the world, and men and deeds. Then answered the prophet, Victory, jewels, and dancing, but please thy fancy. What is the sparkle of the gem to thee without thy fancy which it allures, and thy fancy is all a dream? Action and deeds and men are not without dreams, and do but fetter them. And only dreams are real, and where thou stayest when the world shall drift away, there shall be only dreams. And the king answered, A mad prophet. And Yanar said, A mad prophet, but believing that his soul possesseth all things of which his soul may become aware, and that he is master of that soul, and thou a high-minded king, believing only that thy soul possesseth such few countries as are leaguered by thine armies and the sea, and that thy soul is possessed by certain strange gods, of whom thou knowest not, who shall deal with it in a way whereof thou knowest not. Until a knowledge come to us that either is wrong, I have wider realms, I, king, than thee, and hold them beneath no overlords. Then the king said, Thou hast said no overlords. To whom then dost thou speak by strange signs at evening above the world? And Yanar went forward and whispered to the king. And the king shouted, Seize ye this prophet, for he is a hypocrite, and speaks to no gods at evening above the world, but has deceived us with his signs. And Yanar said, Come not near me, or I shall point towards you when I speak at evening upon the mountain with those that ye know of. Then Yanar went away, and the guards touched him not. 5. Then spake the prophet Thun, who was clad in seaweed and had no temple, but lived apart from men. All his life he had lived on a lonely beach and had heard forever the wailing of the sea and the crying of the wind in hollows among the cliffs. Some said that having lived so long by the full beating of the sea, and where always the wind cries loudest, he could not feel the joys of other men, but only felt the sorrow of the sea crying in his soul forever. Long ago on the path of stars, midmost between the worlds, there strode the gods of old. In the bleak middle of the worlds they sat, and the worlds went round and round, like dead leaves in the wind at autumn's end, with never a life on one, while the gods went sighing for the things that might not be. And the centuries went over the gods to go where the centuries go, toward the end of things, and with them went the sighs of all the gods as they longed for what might not be. One by one in the midst of the worlds fell dead the gods of old, still sighing for the things that might not be, all slain by their own regrets. Only Shimono-Kani, the youngest of the gods, made him a harp out of the heartstrings of all the elder gods, and, sitting upon the path of stars in the middle of things, played upon the harp a dirge for the gods of old. And the song told of all vain regrets, and of unhappy loves of the gods in the olden time, and of their great deeds that were to adorn the future years. But into the dirge of Shimono-Kani came voices crying out of the heartstrings of the gods, all sighing still for the things that might not be. And the dirge and the voices crying go drifting away from the path of stars, away from the midst of things, till they come twittering among the worlds, like a great host of birds that are lost by night. And every note is a life, and many notes become caught up among the worlds to be entangled with flesh for a little while before they pass again on their journey to the great anthem that roars at the end of time. Shimono-Kani hath given a voice to the wind, and added a sorrow to the sea. But when in lighted chambers after feasting there arises the voice of the singer to please the king, then is the soul of that singer crying aloud to his fellows from where he stands chained to earth. And when, at the sound of the singing, the heart of the king grows sad, and his princes lament, then they remember, though knowing not that they remember it, the sad face of Shimono-Kani, sitting by his dead brethren, the elder gods, playing on the harp of crying heartstrings, whereby he sent their souls among the worlds. And when the music of one lute is lonely on the hills at night, then one soul calleth to his brother souls, the notes of Shimono-Kani's dirge, which have not been caught among the worlds. And he knoweth not to whom he calls or why, but knoweth only that minstrelsy is his only cry, and sendeth it out into the dark. But although in the prison houses of earth all memories must die, yet as there sometimes clings to a prisoner's feet some dust of the fields wherein he was captured, so sometimes fragments of remembrance cling to a man's soul after it hath been taken to earth. Then a great minstrel arises, and weaving together the shreds of his memories, maketh some melody such as the hand of Shimono-Kani smites out of his harp. And they that pass by say, hath there not been some such melody before? And pass on sad at heart for memories which are not. Therefore, O king, one day the great gates of thy palace shall lie open for a procession wherein the king comes down to pass through a people, lamenting with lute and drum. And on the same day a prison door shall be opened by relenting hands, and one more lost note of Shimono-Kani's dirge shall go back to swell his melody again. The dirge of Shimono-Kani shall roll on till one day it shall come with all its notes complete, to overwhelm the silence that sits at the end of things. Then shall Shimono-Kani say to his brethren's bones, the things that might not be have at last become. But very quiet shall be the bones of the gods of old, and only their voices shall live which cried from the harp of heartstrings for the things which might not be. 6. When the caravans, saying farewell to Zendara, set out across the waste northwards toward Ainandu, they follow the desert track for 7 days before they come to water where Shuba-Onath rises black out of the waste, with a well at its foot and herbage on its summit. On this rock a prophet hath his temple, and is called the prophet of journeys, and hath carven in a southern window, smiling along the camel track, all gods that are benignant to caravans. There a traveler may learn by prophecy whether he shall accomplish the 10 days' journey thence across the desert, and so come to the white city of Ein-en-Du, or whether his bones shall lie with the bones of old along the desert track. No name hath the prophet of journeys, for none is needed in that desert where no man calls, nor ever a man answers. Thus spake the prophet of journeys, standing before the king. The journey of the king shall be an old journey pushed on apace. Many a year before the making of the moon, thou camest down with dream camels from the city without a name that stands beyond all the stars, and then began thy journey over the waste of naught, and thy dream camel bore thee well when those of certain of thy fellow travelers fell down in the waste and were covered over by the silence and were turned again to naught. And those travelers, when their dream camels fell, having nothing to carry them further over the waste, were lost beyond and never found the earth. These are those men that might have been but were not. And all about thee fluttered the myriad hours, traveling in great swarms across the waste of naught. How many centuries passed across the cities while thou wast making thy journey, none may reckon, for there is no time in the waste of naught, but only the hours fluttering earthwards from beyond to do the work of time. At last the dream-born travelers saw far off a green place gleaming, and made haste towards it, and so came to earth. And there, O king, ye rest for a little while, thou and those that came with thee, making an encampment upon earth before journeying on. There the swarming hours alight, settling on every blade of grass and tree, and spreading over your tents and devouring all things, and at last bending your very tent poles with their weight, and wearying you. Behind the encampment, in the shadow of the tents, lurks a dark figure with a nimble sword, having the name of Time. This is he that hath called the hours from beyond, and he it is that is their master. And it is his work that the hours do as they devour all green things upon the earth, and tatter the tents, and weary all the travelers. As each of the hours does the work of Time, Time smites him with his nimble sword as soon as his work is done, and the hour falls severed to the dust, with his bright wings scattered, as a locust cut asunder by the scimitar of a skillful swordsman. One by one, O king, with a stir in the camp, and the folding up of the tents one by one, the travelers shall push on again on the journey begun so long before out of the city without a name, to the place where dream camels go, striding free through the waste. So, into the waste, O king, thou shalt set forth ere long, perhaps to renew friendships begun during thy short encampment upon earth. Other green places thou shalt meet in the waste, and thereon shalt encamp again until driven thence by the hours. What prophet shall relate how many journeys thou shalt make, or how many encampments? But at last thou shalt come to the place of the resting of camels, and there shall gleaming cliffs that are named the ending of journeys lift up out of the waste of naught. Naught at their feet, naught laying wide before them, with only the glint of worlds far off to illumine the waste. One by one, untired dream camels, the travelers shall come in, and going up the pathway through the cliff in that land of the resting of camels, shall come on the city of ceasing. There, the dream-wrought pinnacles and the spires that are builded of men's hopes shall rise up real before thee, seen only hitherto as a mirage in the waste. So far, the swarming hours may not come, and far away among the tents shall stand the dark figure with the nimble sword. But in the scintillant streets, under the song-built abodes of the last of cities, thy journey, O king, shall end. 7. In the valley beyond Sidono, there lies a garden of poppies, and where the poppies' heads are all a-swing with summer breezes that go up the valley, there lies a path well strewn with ocean shells. Over Sidono's summit, the birds come streaming to the lake that lies in the valley of the garden, and behind them rises the sun, sending Sidono's shadow as far as the edge of the lake. And down the path of many ocean shells, when they begin to gleam in the sun, every morning walks an aged man clad in a silken robe with strange devices woven. A little temple where the old man lives stands at the edge of the path. None worship there, for Zorna-Du, the old prophet, hath forsaken men to walk among his poppies. For Zorna-Du hath failed to understand the purport of kings and cities and the moving up and down of many people to the tune of the clinking of gold. Therefore hath Zorna-Du gone far away from the sound of cities and from those that are ensnared thereby, and beyond Sidono's mountain hath come to rest where there are neither kings nor armies nor bartering for gold, but only the heads of the poppies that sway in the wind together, and the birds that fly from Sidono to the lake, and then the sunrise over Sidono's summit. And afterwards the flight of birds out of the lake and over Sidono again, and sunset behind the valley, and high over lake and garden the stars that know not cities. There Zorna-Du lives in his garden of poppies, with Sidono standing between him and the whole world of men. And when the wind blowing athwart the valley sways the heads of the tall poppies against the temple wall, the old prophet says, "The flowers are all praying, and lo, they be nearer to the gods than men." But the heralds of the king, coming after many days of travel to Sidono, perceived the garden valley. By the lake they saw the poppy garden gleaming round and small like a sunrise over water on a misty morning seen by some shepherd from the hills. And descending the bare mountain for 3 days, they came to the gaunt pines, and ever between the tall trunks came the glare of the poppies that shone from the garden valley. For a whole day they traveled through the pines. That night a cold wind came up the garden valley crying against the poppies. Lo, in his temple with a song of exceeding grief, Zorna-Du in the morning made a dirge for the passing of poppies, because in the night-time there had fallen petals that might not return or ever come again into the garden valley. Outside the temple, on the path of ocean shells, the heralds halted and read the names and honors of the king. And from the temple came the voice of Zorna-Du, still singing his lament. But they took him from his garden because of the king's command, and down his gleaming path of ocean shells, and away up Sidono, and left the temple empty with none to lament when silken poppies died. And the will of the wind of the autumn was wrought upon the poppies, and the heads of the poppies that rose from the earth went down to the earth again, as the plume of a warrior smitten in a heathen fight far away, where there are none to lament him. Thus out of his land of flowers went Zorna-Du, and came perforce into the lands of men, and saw cities, and in the cities' midst stood up before the king. And the king said, "Zorna-Du, what of the journey of the king and of the princes and of the people that shall meet me?" Zorna-Du answered, "I know naught of kings, but in the night-time the poppy made his journey a little before dawn. Thereafter the wildfowl came, as is their wont, over Sidono's summit, and the sun rising behind them gleamed upon Sidono, and all the flowers of the lake awoke. And the bee, passing up and down the garden, went droning to other poppies. And the flowers of the lake, they that had known the poppy, knew him no more. And the sun's rays, slanting from Sidono's crest, lit still a garden valley where one poppy waved his petals to the dawn no more. And I, O king, that down a path of gleaming ocean shells walk in the morning, found not, nor have since found that poppy again, that hath gone on the journey whence there is not returning, out of my garden valley. And I, O king, made a dirge to cry beyond that valley, and the poppies bowed their heads. But there is no cry nor lament that may adjure the life to return again to a flower that grew in a garden once, and hereafter is not. Unto what place the lives of poppies have gone no man shall truly say. Sure it is that to that place are only outward tracks. Only it may be that when a man dreams at evening in a garden where heavily the scent of poppies hangs in the air, when the winds have sunk, and far away the sound of a lute is heard on lonely hills, as he dreams of silk and scarlet poppies that once were a swing together in the gardens of his youth, The lives of those old poppies shall return, living again in his dream. So there may dream the gods, and through the dreams of some divinity reclining in tinted fields above the morning, we may happily pass again, although our bodies have long swirled up and down the world with other dust. In these strange dreams, our lives may be again, all in the center of our hopes, rejoicings, and laments, until above the morning the gods wake to go about their work, happily to remember still their idle dreams, happily to dream them all again in the stillness when shines the starlight of the gods. 8. Then said the king, I like not these strange journeys, nor this faint wandering through the dreams of gods like the shadow of a weary camel that may not rest when the sun is low. The gods that have made me to love the earth's cool woods and dancing streams do ill to send me into the starry spaces that I love not, with my soul still peering earthward through the eternal years, as a beggar who once was noble staring from the street at lighted halls. For wherever the gods may send me, I shall be as the gods have made me, a creature loving the green fields of earth. Now, if there stand one prophet here that hath the ear of those two splendid gods that stride above the glories of the orient sky, tell them that there is on earth one king in the land called Zarkandu, to the south of the Opal Mountains, who would fain tarry among the many gardens of earth, and would leave to other men the splendors that the gods shall give the dead above the twilight that surrounds the stars. Then spake Yaman, prophet of the temple of Oben that stands on the shores of a great lake, facing east. Yaman said, I pray oft to the gods who sit above the twilight behind the east, when the clouds are heavy and red at sunset, or when there is boding of thunder or eclipse. Then I pray not, lest my prayers be scattered and beaten earthward. But when the sun sets in a tranquil sky, pale green or azure, and the light of his farewells stays long upon lonely hills, then I send forth my prayers to flutter upward to gods that are surely smiling, and the gods hear my prayers. But, O king, boons sought out of due time from the gods are never wholly to be desired, and if they should grant to thee to tarry on the earth, old age would trouble thee with burdens more and more till thou wouldest become the driven slave of the hours and fetters that none may break. The king said, They that have devised this burden of age may surely stay it. Pray therefore on the calmest evening of the year to the gods above the twilight, that I may tarry always on the earth, and always young, while over my head the scourges of the gods pass and alight not. Then answered Yaman, The king hath commanded, yet among the blessings of the gods there always cries a curse. The great princes that make merry with the king, who tell of the great deeds that the king wrought in the former time, shall one by one grow old. And thou, O king, seated at the feast crying, Make merry, and extolling the former time, shall find about thee white heads nodding in sleep, and men that are forgetting the former time. Then one by one the names of those that sported with thee, once called by the gods, one by one the names of the singers that sing the songs thou lovest, called by the gods. Lastly, of those that chased the grey boar by night, and took him in Orgum River. Only the king. Then a new people that have not known the old deeds of the king, nor fought and chased with him, who dare not make merry with the king as did his long-dead princes. And all the while those princes that are dead growing dearer and greater in thy memory, and all the while the men that served thee then growing more small to thee, and all the old things fading, and new things arising which are not as the old things were, the world changing yearly before thine eyes, and the gardens of thy childhood overgrown. Because thy childhood was in the olden years, thou shalt love the olden years, but ever the new years shall overthrow them and their customs, and not the will of a king may stay the changes that the gods have planned for all the customs of old. Ever thou shalt say, This was not so, and ever the new custom shall prevail even against a king. When thou hast made merry 1,000 times, thou shalt grow tired of making merry. At last thou shalt become weary of the chase, and still old age shall not come near to thee to stifle desires that have been too oft fulfilled. Then, O king, thou shalt be a hunter yearning for the chase, but with naught to pursue that hath not been oft overcome. Old age shall come not to bury thine ambitions in a time when there is naught for thee to aspire to any more. Experience of many centuries shall make thee wise, but hard and very sad, and thou shalt be a mind apart from thy fellows, and curse them all for fools. And they shall not perceive thy wisdom, because thy thoughts are not their thoughts, and the gods that they have made are not the gods of the olden time. No solace shall thy wisdom bring thee, but only an increasing knowledge that thou knowest not, and thou shalt feel as a wise man in a world of fools, or else as a fool in a world of wise men, when all men feel so sure, and ever thy doubts increase. When all that spake with thee of thine old deeds are dead, those that saw them not shall speak of them again to thee, till one, speaking to thee of thy deeds of valor, add more than even a man should when speaking to a king, and thou shalt suddenly doubt whether these great deeds were. And there shall be none to tell thee, only the echoes of the voices of the gods still singing in thine ears when, long ago, they called the princes that were thy friends. And thou shalt hear the knowledge of the olden time most wrongly told, and afterwards forgotten. Then many prophets shall arise, claiming discovery of that old knowledge. Then thou shalt find that seeking knowledge is vain, as the chase is vain, as making merry is vain, as all things are vain. One day thou shalt find that it is vain to be a king. Greatly then will the acclamations of the people weary thee, till the time when people grow aweary of kings. Then thou shalt know that thou hast been uprooted from thine olden time and set to live in uncongenial years, and jests all new to royal ears shall smite thee on the head like hailstones, when thou hast lost thy crown, when those to whose grandsires thou hadst granted to bring them as children to kiss the feet of the king shall mock at thee, because thou hast not learnt to barter with gold. Not all the marvels of the future time shall atone to thee for those old memories that glow warmer and brighter every year as they recede into the ages that the gods have gathered. And always dreaming of thy long-dead princes and of the great kings of other kingdoms in the olden time, thou shalt fail to see the grandeur to which a hurrying, jesting people shall attain in that kingless age. Lastly, O king, thou shalt perceive men changing in a way that thou shalt not comprehend, knowing what thou canst not know, till thou shalt discover that these are men no more, and a new race holds dominion over the earth, whose forefathers were men. These shall speak to thee no more as they hurry upon a quest that thou shalt never understand, and thou shalt know that thou canst no longer take thy part in shaping destinies, but in a world of cities only pine for air and the waving grass again and the sound of a wind in trees. Then even this shall end with the shapes of the gods in the darkness gathering all lives but thine, when the hills shall fling up earth's long-stored heat back to the heavens again, when earth shall be old and cold, with nothing alive upon it but one king. Then said the king, Pray to those hard gods still, for those that have loved the earth with all its gardens and woods and singing streams will love earth still when it is old and cold and with all its gardens gone, and all the purport of its being failed, and naught but memories. 9. Then spake Paharn, a prophet of the land of Hurn. And Paharn said, There was one man that knew, but he stands not here. And the king said, Is he further than my heralds might travel in the night if they went upon fleet horses? And the prophet answered, He is no further than thy heralds may well travel in the night, but further than they may return from in all the years. Out of this city there goes a valley wandering through all the world and opens out at last on the green land of Herne. On the one side in the distance gleams the sea, and on the other side a forest, black and ancient, darkens the fields of Herne. Beyond the forest and the sea there is no more, saving the twilight, and beyond that the gods. In the mouth of the valley sleeps the village of Rhistonne. Here I was born, and heard the murmur of the flocks and herds, and saw the tall smoke standing between the sky and the still roofs of Rhistonne, and learned that men might not go into the dark forest, and that beyond the forest and the sea was naught saving the twilight, and beyond that the gods. Often there came travelers from the world all down the winding valley, and spake with strange speech in Rhistonne, and returned again up the valley going back to the world. Sometimes with bells and camels and men running on foot, kings came down the valley from the world, but always the travelers returned by the valley again, and none went further than the land of Herne. And Kithneb also was born in the land of Herne, and tended the flocks with me, but Kithneb would not care to listen to the murmur of the flocks and herds, and see the tall smoke standing between the roofs and the sky, but needed to know how far from Herne it was that the world met the twilight, and how far across the twilight sat the gods. And often Kithneb dreamed as he tended the flocks and herds, and when others slept he would wander near to the edge of the forest wherein men might not go. And the elders of the land of Herne reproved Kithneb when he dreamed. Yet Kithneb was still as other men, and mingled with his fellows until the day of which I will tell thee, O king. For Kithneb was aged about 80 years, and he and I were sitting near the flocks, and he gazed long at the point where the dark forest met the sea at the end of the land of Herne. But when night drove the twilight down under the forest, we brought the flocks together to Rhistonne, and I went up the street between the houses to see 4 princes that had come down the valley from the world, and they were clad in blue and scarlet, and wore plumes upon their heads, and they gave us in exchange for our sheep some gleaming stones which they told us were of great value on the word of princes. And I sold them 3 sheep, and Darniag sold them 8. But Kithneb came not with the others to the marketplace where the 4 princes stood, but went alone across the fields to the edges of the forest. And it was upon the next morning that the strange thing befell Kithneb, for I saw him in the morning coming from the fields, and I hailed him with the shepherd's cry, wherewith we shepherds call to one another, and he answered not. Then I stopped and spake to him, and Kithneb said not a word till I became angry and left him. Then we spake together concerning Kithneb, and others had hailed him, and he had not answered them, but to one he had said that he had heard the voices of the gods speaking beyond the forest, and so would never listen more to the voices of men. Then we said, Kithneb is mad, and none hindered him. Another took his place among the flocks, and Kithneb sat in the evenings by the edge of the forest on the plain alone. So Kithneb spake to none for many days, but when any forced him to speak, he said that every evening he heard the gods when they came to sit in the forest from over the twilight and sea, and that he would speak no more with men. But as the months went by, men in Rhistonne came to look on Kithneb as a prophet, and we were wont to point to him when strangers came down the valley from the world, saying, Here in the land of Herne we have a prophet such as you have not among your cities, for he speaks at evening with the gods. A year passed over the silence of Kithneb when he came to me and spake, and I bowed before him because we believed that he spake among the gods. And Kithneb said, I will speak to thee before the end because I am most lonely. For how may I speak again with men and women in the little streets of Rhistonne among the houses, when I have heard the voices of the gods singing above the twilight? But I am more lonely than ever Rhistonne wots of. For this I tell thee, when I hear the gods I know not what they say. Well indeed, I know the voice of each, forever calling me away from contentment. Well I know their voices as they call to my soul and trouble it. I know by their tone when they rejoice, and I know when they are sad, for even the gods feel sadness. I know when over fallen cities of the past and the curved white bones of heroes they sing the dirges of the gods' lament. But alas, their words I know not, and the wonderful strains of the melody of their speech beat on my soul and pass away unknown. Therefore I traveled from the land of Herne till I came to the house of the prophet Arnin Yo, and I told him that I sought to find the meaning of the gods. And Arnin Yo told me to ask the shepherds concerning all the gods, for what the shepherds knew it was meet for a man to know, and beyond that, knowledge turned into trouble. But I told Arnin Yo that I had heard myself the voices of the gods, and knew that they were there beyond the twilight, and so could never more bow down to the gods that the shepherds made from the red clay, which they scooped with their hands out of the hillside. Then said Arnin Yo to me, "Natheless forget that thou hast heard the gods and bow down again to the gods of the red clay that the shepherds make, and find thereby the ease that the shepherds find, and at last die, remembering devoutly the gods of the red clay that the shepherds scoop with their hands out of the hill. For the gifts of the gods that sit beyond the twilight and smile at the gods of clay are neither ease nor contentment." And I said, "The god that my mother made out of the red clay that she had got from the hill, fashioning it with many arms and eyes as she sang me songs of its power, and told me stories of its mystic birth, this god is lost and broken, and ever in my ears is ringing the melody of the gods." And Arnin Yo said, "If thou wouldest still seek knowledge, know that only those that come behind the gods may clearly know their meaning. And this thou canst only do by taking ship and putting out to sea from the land of Herne and sailing up the coast towards the forest. There the sea cliffs turn to the left or southward, and full upon them beats the twilight from over the sea, and there thou mayest come round behind the forest. Here, where the world's edge mingles with the twilight, the gods come in the evening, and if thou canst come behind them, thou shalt hear their voices clear, beating full seaward and filling all the twilight with sound of song, and thou shalt know the meaning of the gods. But where the cliffs turn southward, there sits behind the gods Brimdono, the oldest whirlpool in the sea, roaring to guard his masters. Him the gods have chained forever to the floor of the twilight sea, to guard the door of the forest that lieth above the cliffs. Hear then, if thou canst hear the voices of the gods as thou hast said, thou wilt know their meaning clear, but this will profit thee little when Brimdono drags thee down, and all thy ship." Thus spake Kithneb to me. But I said, "O Kithneb, forget those whirlpool-guarded gods beyond the forest, and if thy small god be lost, thou shalt worship with me the small god that my mother made. Thousands of years ago he conquered cities, but is not any longer an angry god. Pray to him, Kithneb, and he shall bring thee comfort and increase to thy flocks, and a mild spring, and at the last a quiet ending for thy days." But Kithneb heeded not, only bade me find a fisher ship and men to row it. So on the next day we put forth from the land of Herne in a boat that the fisher folk use. And with us came 4 of the fisher folk who rowed the boat while I held the rudder. But Kithneb sat and spake not in the prow. And we rowed westward up the coast till we came at evening where the cliffs turned southward, and the twilight gleamed upon them and the sea. There we turned southwards and saw at once Brimdono. And as a man tears the purple cloak of a king slain in battle to divide it with other warriors, Brimdono tore the sea, and ever around and around him with a gnarled hand, Brimdono whirled the sail of some adventurous ship, the trophy of some calamity wrought in his greed for shipwreck long ago where he sat to guard his masters from all who fare on the sea. And ever one far-reaching empty hand swung up and down so that we durst go no nearer. Only Kithneb neither saw Brimdono nor heard his roar, and when we would go no further, bade us lower a small boat with oars out of the ship. Into this boat Kithneb descended, not heeding words from us, and onward rowed alone. A cry of triumph over ships and men Brimdono uttered before him, but Kithneb's eyes were turned toward the forest as he came behind the gods. Upon his face the twilight beat full from the haunts of evening to illumine the smiles that grew about his eyes as he came behind the gods. Him that had found the gods above their twilight cliffs, him that had heard their voices close at last and knew their meaning clear, him from the cheerless world with its doubtings and prophets that lie, from all hidden meetings where truth rang clear at last, Brimdono took. But when Parhan ceased to speak, in the king's ears the roar of Brimdono exulting over ancient triumphs and the whelming of ships, seemed still to ring. 10. Then Mohantas spake, the hermit prophet, who lived in the deep untraveled woods that seclude Lake Ilana. I dreamed that to the west of all seas I saw by vision the mouth of Munra-O, guarded by golden gates, and through the bars of the gates that guard the mysterious river of Munra-O, I saw the flashes of golden barks, wherein the gods went up and down, and to and fro through the evening dusk. And I saw that Munra-O was a river of dreams, such as came through remembered gardens in the night, to charm our infancy as we slept beneath the sloping gables of the houses of long ago. And Munra-O rolled down her dreams from the unknown inner land, and slid them under the golden gates and out into the waste, unheeding sea, till they beat far off upon low-lying shores, then murmured songs of long ago to the islands of the south, or shouted tumultuous paeans to the northern crags, or cried forlornly against rocks where no one came, dreams that might not be dreamed. Many gods there be that through the dusk of an evening in the summer go up and down this river. There I saw, in a high bark all of gold, gods of the pomp of cities. There I saw gods of splendor in boats bejeweled to the keels, gods of magnificence and gods of power. I saw the dark ships and the glint of steel of the gods whose trade was war, and I heard the melody of the bells of silver arow in the rigging of harp strings as the gods of melody went sailing through the dusk on the river of Munra-O. Wonderful river of Munra-O! I saw a gray ship with sails of the spider's web, all lit with dewdrop lanterns, and on its prow was a scarlet cock with its wings spread far and wide, when the gods of the dawn sailed also on Munra-O. Down this river it is the wont of the gods to carry the souls of men eastward, to where the world in the distance faces on Munra-O. Then I knew that when the gods of the pride of power and gods of the pomp of cities went down the river in all their tall gold ships to take earthward other souls, swiftly adown the river and between the ships had gone in this boat of birch bark the god Tarn, the hunter, bearing my soul to the world. And I know now that he came down the stream in the dusk, keeping well to the middle, and that he moved silently and swiftly among the ships, wielding a twin-bladed oar. I remember now the yellow gleaming of the great boats of the gods of the pomp of cities, and the huge prow above me of the gods of the pride of power, when Tarn, dipping his right blade into the river, lifted his left blade high, and the drops gleamed and fell. Thus Tarn the hunter took me to the world that faces across the sea of the west and the gate of Munra-O, and so it was that there grew upon me the glamour of the hunt, though I had forgotten Tarn, and took me into mossy places and into dark woods, and I became the cousin of the wolf, and looked into the lynx's eyes, and knew the bear, and the birds called to me with half-remembered notes, and there grew in me a deep love of great rivers, and of all western seas, and a distrust of cities, and all the while I had forgotten Tarn. I know not what high galleon shall come for thee, O king, nor what rowers, clad with purple, shall row at the bidding of gods when thou goest back with pomp to the river of Munra-O. But for me, Tarn waits where the seas of the west break over the edge of the world, and as the years pass over me, and the love of the chase sinks low, and as the glamour of the dark woods and mossy places dies down in my soul, ever louder and louder lap the ripples against the canoe of birch bark, where, holding his twin-bladed oar, Tarn waits. But when my soul hath no more knowledge of the woods, nor kindred any longer with the creatures of the dark, and when all that Tarn hath given it shall be lost, then Tarn shall take me back over the western seas, where all the remembered years lie floating idly a-swing with the ebb and flow, to bring me again to the river of Munra-O. Far up that river we shall happily chase those creatures whose eyes are peering in the night as they prowl around the world, for Tarn was ever a hunter. 11. Then Ulf spake, the prophet who in Sistramedes lives in a temple anciently dedicated to the gods. Rumor hath guessed that there the gods walked once some time towards evening. But Time, whose hand is against the temples of the gods, had dealt harshly with it, and overturned its pillars, and set upon its ruins his sign and seal. Now Ulf dwells there alone. And Ulf said, "There sets, O king, a river outward from earth which meets with a mighty sea whose waters roll through space and fling their billows on the shores of every star. These are the river and the sea of the tears of men." And the king said, "Men have not written of this sea." And the prophet answered, "Have not tears enough burst in the night time out of sleeping cities? Have not the sorrows of 10,000 homes sent streams into this river when twilight fell, and it was still, and there was none to hear? Have there not been hopes, and were they all fulfilled? Have there not been conquests and bitter defeats? And have not flowers, when spring was over, died in the gardens of many children? Tears enough, O king, tears enough have gone down out of earth to make such a sea. And deep it is, and wide, and the gods know it, and it flings its spray on the shores of all the stars. Down this river and across this sea thou shalt fare in a ship of sighs, and all around thee over the sea shall fly the prayers of men, which rise on white wings higher than their sorrows. Sometimes perched in the rigging, sometimes crying around thee, shall go the prayers that availed not to stay thee in Zarkandhu. For over the waters, and on the wings of the prayers beats the light of an inaccessible star. No hand hath touched it, none hath journeyed to it. It hath no substance. It is only a light. It is the star of hope. And it shines far over the sea, and brightens the world. It is naught but a light, but the gods gave it. Led only by the light of this star, the myriad prayers that thou shalt see all around thee fly to the hall of the gods. Sighs shall waft up thy ship of sighs over the sea of tears. Thou shalt pass by the islands of laughter and lands of song lying low in the sea, and all of them drenched with tears, flung over their rocks by the waves of the sea, all driven by the sighs. But at last thou shalt come with the prayers of men to the great hall of the gods, where the chairs of the gods are carved of onyx, grouped round the golden throne of the eldest of the gods. And there, O king, hope not to find the gods, but reclining upon the golden throne wearing a cloak of his master's, thou shalt see the figure of Time, with blood upon his hands, and loosely dangling from his fingers a dripping sword, and spattered with blood, but empty, shall stand the onyx chairs. There he sits on his master's throne, dangling idly his sword, or with it flicking cruelly at the prayers of men that lie in a great heap bleeding at his feet. For a while, O king, the gods had sought to solve the riddles of Time. For a while they made him their slave, and Time smiled and obeyed his masters. For a while, O king, for a while. He that hath spared nothing hath not spared the gods, nor yet shall he spare thee. Then the king spake dolefully in the hall of kings, and said, May I not find at last the gods? And must it be that I may not look in their faces at the last to see whether they be kindly? They that have sent me on my earthward journey I would greet on my returning, if not as a king coming again to his own city, yet as one who, having been ordered, had obeyed, and obeying had merited something of those for whom he toiled. I would look them in their faces, O prophet, and ask them concerning many things, and would know the wherefore of much. I had hoped, O prophet, that those gods that had smiled upon my childhood, whose voices stirred at evening in gardens when I was young, would hold dominion still, when at last I came to seek them. O prophet, if this is not to be, make you a great dirge for my childhood's gods, and fashion silver bells, and, setting them mostly a-swing amidst such trees as grew in the garden of my childhood, sing you this dirge in the dusk, and sing it when the low moth flies up and down, and the bat first comes peering from her home. Sing it when white mists come rising from the river, when smoke is pale and gray, while flowers are yet closing, ere voices are yet hushed. Sing it while all things yet lament the day, or ever the great lights of heaven come blazing forth, and night with her splendors takes the place of day. For if the old gods die, let us lament them, or ever new knowledge comes, while all the world still shudders at their loss. For at the last, O prophet, what is left? Only the gods of my childhood dead, and only time striding large and lonely through the spaces, chilling the moon and paling the light of stars, and scattering earthward out of both his hands the dust of forgetfulness over the fields of heroes and smitten temples of the older gods. But when the other prophets heard with what doleful words the king spake in the hall, they all cried out, "It is not as Ulf has said, but as I have said, and I." Then the king pondered long, not speaking, but down in the city, in a street between the houses, stood grouped together, they that were wont to dance before the king, and they that had borne his wine in jeweled cups. Long they had tarried in the city, hoping that the king might relent, and once again regard them with kindly faces, calling for wine and song. The next morning they were all to set out in search of some new kingdom, and they were peering between the houses and up the long grey street to see for the last time the palace of King Ebelon, and pattering leaves, the dancer cried, not any more at all shall we drift up the carven hall to dance before the king. He that now watches the magic of his prophets will behold no more the wonder of the dance, and among ancient parchments, strange and wise, he shall forget the swirl of drapery when we swing together through the dance of the myriad steps. And with her were silvern fountain and summer lightning, and dream of the sea, each lamenting that they should dance no more to please the eyes of the king. And Intan, who had carried at the banquet for 50 years the goblet of the king, set with its 4 sapphires each as large as an eye, said as he spread his hands towards the palace, making the sign of farewell, "Not all the magic of prophecy, nor yet foreseeing nor perceiving, may equal the power of wine. Through the small door in the king's hall one goes by 100 steps, and many sloping corridors into the cool of the earth, where lies a caravan vaster than the hall. Therein, curtained by the spider, repose the casks of wine that are wont to gladden the hearts of the kings of Zarkandhu. In islands far to the eastward, the vine, from whose heart this wine was long since wrung, hath climbed aloft with many a clutching finger, and beheld the sea and ships of the olden time, and men since dead, and gone down into the earth again, and been covered over with weeds. And green with the damp of years, there lie 3 casks that a city gave not up until all her defenders were slain and her houses fired, and ever to the soul of that wine is added a more ardent fire, as ever the years go by. Thither it was my pride to go before a banquet in the olden years, and coming up to bear in the sapphire goblet the fire of the elder kings, and to watch the king's eye flash, and his face grow nobler and more like his sire's as he drank the gleaming wine. And now the king seeks wisdom from his prophets, while all the glory of the past and all the clattering splendor of today grows old, far down, forgotten beneath his feet." And when he ceased, the cupbearers and the women that danced looked long in silence at the palace. Then one by one, all made the farewell sign before they turned to go, and as they did this, a herald unseen in the dark was speeding towards them. After a long silence, the king spake. "Prophets of my kingdom," he said, "you have not prophesied alike, and the words of each prophet condemn his fellow's words, so that wisdom may not be discovered among prophets. But I command that none in my kingdom shall doubt that the earliest king of Zarkandhu stored wine beneath this palace before the building of the city, or ever the palace arose, and I shall cause commands to be uttered for the making of a banquet at once within this hall, so that ye shall perceive that the power of my wine is greater than all your spells, and dancing more wondrous than prophecy." The dancers and the wine-bearers were summoned back, and as night wore on, a banquet was spread, and all the prophets bidden to be seated. Saman, Yanath, Monith, Yanarthun, the prophet of journeys, Zornadu, Yamen, Paharn, Ilana, Ulf, and one that had not spoken nor yet revealed his name, and who wore his prophet's cloak across his face. And the prophets feasted as they were commanded, and spake as other men spake, save he whose face was hidden, who neither ate nor spake. Once he put out his hand from under his cloak and touched a blossom among the flowers upon the table, and the blossom fell. And pattering leaves came in and danced again, And the king smiled, and Pattering Leaves was happy, though she had not the wisdom of the prophets. And in and out, in and out, in and out among the columns of the hall went Summer Lightning in the maze of the dance. And Silvern Fountain bowed before the king and danced and bowed again. And old Intan went to and fro from the cavern to the king gravely through the midst of the dancers, but with kindly eyes. And when the king had often drunk of the old wine of the elder kings, he called for Dream of the Sea and bade her sing. And Dream of the Sea came through the arches and sang of an island builded by magic out of pearls that lay set in a ruby sea, and how it lay far off and under the south, guarded by jagged reefs whereon the sorrows of the world were wrecked and never came to the island, and how a low sunset always reddened the sea and lit the magic isle and never turned to night, and how someone sang always and endlessly to lure the soul of a king who might, by enchantment, pass the guarding reefs to find rest on the Pearl Island and not be troubled more, but only see sorrows on the outer reef battered and broken. Then Soul of the South rose up and sang a song of a fountain that ever sought to reach the sky and was ever doomed to fall to the earth again, until at last. Then, whether it was the art of Pattering Leaves, or the song of Dream of the Sea, or whether it was the fire of the wine of the elder kings, Ebelon bade farewell kindly to the prophets when morning paled the stars. Then along the torchlit corridors the king went to his chamber, and having shut the door in the empty room, beheld suddenly a figure wearing the cloak of a prophet. And the king perceived that it was he whose face was hidden at the banquet, who had not revealed his name. And the king said, "Art thou too a prophet?" And the figure answered, "I am a prophet." And the king said, "Knowest thou aught concerning the journey of the king?" And the figure answered, "I know, but have never said." And the king said, "Who art thou that knowest so much and hast not told it?" And he answered, "I am the end." Then the cloaked figure strode away from the palace, and the king, unseen by the guards, followed upon his journey. The end.